Dear students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor M.P. Stija, retired recently from the Department of Library and Information Science, Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar. Today, we are going to discuss classification as a logical activity and a process of daily routine. You will be rather surprised to know that classification is not a subject of library science. You are not learning classification after taking admission in this course. Classification you have been doing since your birth. Since classification is a neural activity, classification is going on every moment in the society and in every living organization. Maybe a system, mechanical, bio, or electrical, social, has to classify. Without classification, nothing can exist. It is a classification which brings order in a chaos. And it is rightly said that order is the first law of nature. And this order is only introduced by classification. Classification, simply speaking, is nothing but making classes, that is groups. And a group is a class having at least one similarity in common. And then it may have many more similarities, but at least it should have one characteristics or the basis of division or making group that should be common among all the groups. For example, all the Indians, more than 100 crore Indians make one class, that is all Indians. Among them, let all Punjabis make one more class. All the Gujaratis make another one class. And after that, we can go on making classes and classes by dividing into subgroups. These are all classes, and we have to classify everything to simplify it, understand it, and comprehend it. Without classification, a society cannot exist. Without classification, any organization cannot exist. It cannot work. It cannot proceed. So classification is the basis of life. Classification is the basis of social life. Classification is the basis of economic life. Classification is the basis of even biological life. Here we will discuss the process of making groups, that is logical or need-based. Then we will study the scope of classification, that I am to repeat, that is universal. It is required in every sector of life and society. Then lastly, we will also study some problems of classification. Introduction. Classification is the process of making classes of entities of any sort. A class is a set of groups of entities, both abstract and concrete, having at least one common similarity, that's known as characteristics. For example, all the students of a class, a big or small class, of any religion, any caste, coming from different states or regions or even countries, speaking different languages, having different political ideologies, have one characteristics in common, that is, all of them are candidates for the same degree. Meanings of classification. Classification is a process of grouping of similar or like entities. It may be noted that there can be no grouping without division, as there can be no shadow without light or no parting without meeting. It means grouping and divisions are the same thing. Therefore, grouping implies division. Grouping and division are two sides of the same coin. We add a member to a group by separating it from other in the process of grouping or regrouping. Therefore, grouping and division are the basic process of classification. But classification is more than endless grouping and subgrouping. After grouping starts the process of ranking, that is, arranging members of a group in a sequence. That is known as intra-classification. Even a small family can be divided further by status or by age of its group members. Various manifestations of classification. Grouping and division seem primitive or elemental process of classification. Looking at the bottom, classification is correlation or discovering relations between entities. All members of a group are related to one another by some commonality. When we admit an entity into a group, a relation between the entity and the group is discovered or created. Classification organization. Since grouping and intergrouping ranking are acts of organization, such classification is organization. In fact, classification and organizations are inseparable. Now, classification is considered as a tool for organizing in every sense of the word. Since organizations have structure, so classification is structuring and mapping. Classification is matching and pairing. This is implied in grouping of entities brought together. When we are ranking and arranging, we are sorting and tabulating. So matching, tabulating, and sorting are acts of classification. Uses of classification in daily life routines. Classification is a mental act and logical process of association and relations. It goes on every moment of our life, knowingly or unknowingly, deliberately or unconsciously. It is fundamental preoccupation of life. Higher the life complex, the classification. Any system, be it biological, man, social, government, libraries, institutions, or mechanical, computers, machine, has to classify for successful functioning. All human beings, whatever they do, have to classify in every sense of the word. More sophisticated and intelligent persons have better sense of classification. Uses of classification in daily life routines. In everyday life, since morning till evening, when we are conscious, we are classifying. Without classifying, consciously or unconsciously, the life will not be organized or it will be impossible. For example, let's take a small example of postman. Postman classifies postal items for efficient and timely delivery. That's management, saving of time. For quick, efficient, and easy delivery, a postal item is sorted, classified many times at different stages between posting and delivery. For example, at the railway station in every city, the post is divided into regions, then regions into cities. When all the postal items come into a city general post office, then they are sorted into various mohallas or sectors of the city. Then they are handed over to sub post offices, and in the sub post offices they are handed over to the postman. Postman again divides every item according to the street number and the house number. If that's not done in that way, the postman will have to run this way and that way from one street to another street and will not be able to deliver the items very proficiently, efficiently, and in time. So that is also a sort of classification that postman has to put items in order for delivering them into one sequence, that is saving of time. Now let's take another category. Again, that is comes under management, that a fruit seller has to sort his fruits into categories, say oranges, apples, grapes, and so on. They will look better, otherwise it will be chaos. Further, each group of apples is further sorted into species, say Kashmiri apple, Shimla apples, golden apples, green apples, etc. It doesn't stop here. A good fruit seller has to further classify each item, for example, apples or even Kashmiri apples, by quality, medium quality, low quality, or high quality. And that will give a better chance to the customers to select the items. And that is again a process of classification, a time saving, and better management. So in one way, that is classification is a tool for management. Similarly, a housewife has to classify the items in the kitchen for better sorting and for better getting it in time. Scope of classification. There's no act of life where classification is not used. It is applied everywhere. Being a neural activity, it is a basic process to learn and develop. Opposite of classification is disorder and chaos. Classification can be done of all objects, entities, actions, thoughts, and concepts. We can classify people, countries, natural phenomena, plants, flowers, animals, libraries, philosophies, literature, artifacts, automobiles, and whatnot. It is a universal constant. It is the only method to simplify, understand, and comprehend a complex universe, to discover its structure and impose some order over the otherwise chaotic world. Classification is knowledge creation. English philosopher John S. Mill says classification facilitates the operation of the mind in clearly conceiving and retaining in memory the nature of an entity or phenomena. Someone has aptly and axiomatically defined Empirical science as a systematic classification of experiences. Therefore, classification is training of the mind. Eminent educator John Dewey was of the opinion that all knowledge is classification. Brian Buchanan quotes another English philosopher, W.S. Jevons, as saying that all knowledge, all reasoning, so far as it deals with general names or general notions, may be said to consist in classification. Scientists seek recurring patterns, that is, generalizations in nature. Knowledge advances when a pattern is discovered, that is classification. A new idea becomes knowledge only when it is related with some past knowledge. All researchers cite references to previous works for acceptance of their research. Information becomes knowledge when given some context and structure, that's classification. Thus, concepts, information, knowledge, and classification are inherently related. It is often said that to learn is to classify, and classifying is itself an education. It sharpens our thinking, clarity, and expression, and makes us exact in every way, says Ranganathan. Process of classification. As already said, classification is a process of correlation. It is a discovery. It is a way of thinking systematically and purposefully. It is an aid to memory and reasoning. Nothing can be identified without it. It means to define an entity is to classify it first. For example, a gun is a firearm, a chair is a piece of furniture, a car belongs to the class of vehicles, and so on. All thoughts and reasoning underpins some process of classification and vice versa. A group is divided or a member is included into a group on the basis of some characteristic. A characteristic is an attribute, quality, or property of an entity which relates it with or separates it from a group. Classification itself is genus-species relation. A genus is a class, and species is a subclass, and subclass is created by adding a difference to the genus. For example, tables. There are many kinds of tables. But when we add the difference, that is material, we get many tables just like glass tables, wooden tables, plastic tables, metal tables. And here material is a characteristics to divide the universe of tables. Here table is a genus, material is the difference, and glass tables, wooden tables, etc. are species of table. Ancient philosophers applied dichotomous method to divide the universe into two groups at every step. Greek philosopher Porphyry used this method, and the resulting groups and subgroups are spontaneously known as tree of Porphyry. But this classification has become outdated now or very simple, and the modern classification is very complicated, and at the same time we have to add so many characteristics for a good classification. Division by dichotomy or division into two. It is a form of very primitive or old classification which divides all the entities of the universe into two groups at every step. For example, let us see. All the entities, living or dead, were divided into two kinds, that is concrete and abstract. Then concrete is again divided into inorganic and organic. Then organics are further divided into living and non-living. Living are further divided into plants and animals, further divided into vertebrates and invertebrates. Vertebrates are again divided into humans and animals. Humans are further divided into males and females. And further, such a classification goes on. But it may be noted that such classifications are primitive and not very logical. Because, for example, among living, we said plants and animals, but scientists say that there are also some more species which are neither living nor dead, or neither animals nor plants. Similarly, among males and females, now the law and the society accepts the third gender is also there. Among adults, we said young and old. Old people are again divided into society by middle-aged people, old people, senior citizens. So what I mean is that this classification of division by dichotomy is no more useful or no more working. And this has led to classification by multiple methods which has been solved by the faceted classification. Dichotomous method was very simple and primitive. Now the classification is faceted, and you can divide an entity into many species at the same time. For example, literature can be divided by languages, and we can get English literature, French literature, German literature, Spanish literature, Sanskrit literature, and so on. Then further, literature can also be divided by form. For example, poetry, drama, fiction, essays, satires, and so on. Similarly, we can go on making species and subspecies at a different levels until we get a very minute classification. Though classification pervades all life and no life can exist without classification, but at the same time, classification has also its problems, and it has been well said that classification is a logical absurdity because everything cannot be classified absolutely. Classifications are relative, not absolute. No classification exists in nature. Classifications are even man-made because classifications are made to purpose. But despite all these activities, it may be noted that there's no substitute for classification. Without classification, the world will be a chaos, not order that we require. Nature of classification. Classification is meant for simplification, but in itself, it looks a very long-drawn and complex process. Then there are many myths about classification. But logically speaking, classificatory groups are not absolute. Classifications are relative, or something is classified with reference to others. Classification cannot be done in itself. An entity cannot be classified or ranked in itself. It takes two to create a classification. It means a unique entity cannot be classified. It is a class of its own, a unique class. No classification is absolute also means that classifications are not permanent. They are changing. Classifications are not real even. Classifications are man-made. No classification exists in nature. All classifications are man-made or have a social purpose and have some technical purpose too. No classification is good or bad. Classifications are unhelpful or helpful to a varying degree. It all depends upon the purpose of classification. Earlier it was thought that classification may be wrong, classification may be right, or classifications are good or bad. But it all depends upon the purpose or the logic. The logic is how to apply the characteristics. A classification which serves its purpose well is the best, whether logical or not. Because sometimes man looks very unreasonable and they appear, but they have got their own purpose, and that is also a sort of classification. Utility of classification depends upon the characteristics chosen and the order in which these are applied, speaking technically. Classification can only be wrong if the characteristics applied is wrong one, or they are not applied in a sequence. But classification can be right if it is applied very consciously, and it depends what purpose you want to have from that classification. Classification as a tool. According to Aristotle, classification is a theoretical, practical, and productive science. As the saying goes, theory is the most applied knowledge. We can arguably say that classifications are always practical and designed for some purpose. It means that there is no theoretical classification. Every classification has some practical purpose, whatever it may be. Classification is a tool for simplification, comprehension, understanding, and organization. Without organization, classification will not work, and vice versa. All the uses of classification may be summed up as follows. It is a tool for management, it is aesthetics, it is knowledge creation. For example, in aesthetics, if a lady is choosing the shoes that she is wearing to suit her dress, that is classification. In a house, a lady is selecting the curtain for the house to match with the sofa, that is also aesthetics. And aesthetic is for pleasing and to give you good feelings, that is also purpose of classification. And knowledge creation. Classification creates knowledge as we do in laboratories, as we do in taxonomy. Philosophers classify knowledge to create more knowledge and to create and to see the gaps in knowledge. That's also one purpose of classification. And of course, with classification, we save time. We simplify things. That is a tool for management. So it means that classification is always practical. It's never theoretical. Knowledge classification. Classification can be of any object, phenomena, concept, process, or acts. Classification and categorization of knowledge per se is called knowledge classification. Thinkers in all ages, since Aristotle, have to categorize knowledge to understand its nature, categories, boundaries, and growth. That became knowledge classification. And with knowledge classification, we can also understand the extent of knowledge, the gaps in knowledge, and also the nature of knowledge. Classification of knowledge is outlining and mapping to depict structure and boundaries of knowledge. It leads to better understanding of its history, nature, kinds, properties, growth, and also gaps in it. So it is a map of the knowledge. Thus, knowledge grows by its own classification. It becomes a guide for the educationists, scientists, librarians to create more knowledge and to serve knowledge better. Knowledge classification is both speculative, that is theoretical, and empirical, that is practical, and is a province of philosophers and scholars. From time to time, philosophers, scientists, educationists, and other likes have formally categorized entire known knowledge to outline its boundary and show the structure of knowledge. To conclude, we can say classification is an old and very primitive activity of mankind, essentially of every life on this earth, which pervades all sectors of our organized society, even of biological life too. Its scope is wide as classification has got many meanings, from simple grouping to mapping or creating relation among entities. Classification is logical, but classification is always practical. It's not theoretical. Though classification is used in all sort of systems and by people to organize life, but the uses of classification, the numerous uses of classification can be divided or grouped into basically three major activities. One is that classification is a tool for management, that is to organize everything, organize our life activities, organize our systems, organize our economic systems, organize our biological systems, organize our life on this earth. And then classification is also used for aesthetics, to produce feelings of good and beauty. That is the science of beauty aesthetics. And lastly, classification is a tool for creativity in creation of knowledge. And that's why it's known, classification has been known as a tool for knowledge organization that we will study in our next lesson.